Yes, very good, dear Astromania, because I recently did a survey on the channel asking about what videos
Did they?
I'd like you to share with
You guys.
in this channel. Then one of the responses was from Fernando, one of the most active subscribers of the channel. He asked me to do a kind of review of a color camera that he wants to buy, in this case the ZW or ASIS 533 color. So I'm going to make, this is the video for you, Fernando, if you're around. Well, I'm going to make a video talking about this camera, but I'm going to make it a little broader. I'm going to compare three cameras that seem to me to be pretty equivalent or pretty similar on the market. I'm going to compare the three. It seems to me that it is better than a simple revival of 533 and leaving it to your consideration which one it is.
The best, right?
Which one or which do you prefer to buy? I mean, well, the Asus is 533 in color, which is what Fernando asked me, and also the Asus 183. What color is this one I have here? The 183 is pretty similar, even the price. And the camera, or one of the cheapest cameras on the market, the Asus 585, which costs about $200 less than the previous two, and has an excellent sensor. So I'm going to compare the three features of each: pros, cons, price, sensor size, etc., etc. And so you will be able to draw your own conclusions, not only Fernando, anyone who is thinking of buying a camera of the cheapest, let's say, that there is on the market, and color in this case. Well, I am going to make this kind of these three cameras to compare, and well, give of course my criterion at the end of which perhaps is the best criterion. In the end, it is not categorical at all. Not everything is subjective.
So which one?
My criterion in the end is also the idea of this channel. Share with you what I think about these three cameras. Well, before continuing, I want to remind you that if you have not subscribed to the channel, then subscribe. If you are interested in this type of content that we do here in astronomy, close to astronomy, and new technical astrophotography instruments and so on, then subscribe. If you find this video interesting, give a like, and thus help you view the channel. Click on the bell so that you don't miss new videos. Above all, many times, because I make live videos of phenomena that are happening
In that one.
I need a moment, and well, I went to the bell so they don't miss it.
Alive and kicking.
Important, we already have our merchandise on the channel. We already have this cap, for example, with the Astromania logo. We have caps, we have polo shirts.
With him.
With the logo, the name of the channel. We have jugs, we have several
Others.
things, backpacks, handbags, etc., etc., and it keeps growing. So those interested in buying any of these products with the logo, with the name of the channel, since it is already available on the main page of the channel, also in our videos, since there is the link to buy these products, and so those interested in have,
One.
let's say, a souvenir of the canal, since it is now available. And now, yes, without further ado, we are going to write these three cameras, and let's see, in my opinion, which one is the best.
3. Well, I have collided a Word document with comparing not the three cameras, the 533H, which is the one that Fernando asked me about them, the 183, which is the one that I
possess.
Also, the A65085 is among the most affordable options available. So let's begin. All right, let's begin.
For this image, the image I have,
Front of each.
one as shown.
The sensor, the one at 533H, is interesting. It is a square sensor of, as we see here, sensor dimensions. The dimensions 11.31 by 1131 millimillimeter. That is a little more than 1 centimeter, but a square sensor, the 183. It's rectangular. The 585 also rectangular. This is really not, shall we say, very important. It is simply a matter of sometimes everyone's tastes. There are no people who
We're more used to it.
to these rectangular sensors, that, and these images, well, or vertical or flat, but less accustomed to square images. But hey, that, I repeat, is simply not an important factor.
A small detail, right?
And Well, it may also be a matter of taste. The total area as such, I have approximately not done the calculation, but 533 AH and 183, these two, as you can see here, the dimensions are 11.31 by 1131, 583, 13.2 by 8.8. The 183, I repeat, I have not done the very simple calculation. That is simply multiplying these two sides of the sensor, but it seems to me that there is not much difference. They are quite similar. That is, let's say the visual field, the total visual area would be more or less the same, which in different forms. In the case of the 585, it is smaller. As you can see, the sensor dimension 11.2. By 6.3, therefore, it is smaller. I repeat, it's a smaller sensor. It is one of the disadvantages of the 585, but on the other hand, it has many advantages and is about $200 cheaper, so it would have to be thought about. So let's go feature by feature. I put in red what I consider that, or we are going to start with the blue that it is. What I consider is that the camera that is at an advantage, and in red, the camera that is at a disadvantage when there are two cameras that have the same characteristics, either advantage or disadvantage. Well, I do not point it out because neither is superior to the other. So let's go with the price first. Obviously, which wins the price? Well, the 585, as you can see here, costs $599 or about $600. The other two are around $800, so 2. This one wins, that's why I put it in blue. Is it $200 cheaper than the others? Already there, the 585? Well, let's say that it is winning. Let's say now in the dimensions of the pixels, or in micro, the size of the pixels. Why is that important? Well, not so much by the resolution of the image, that is by the total resolution of the image, but by the second or pixels per second and so on. That is the ability to see smaller details with the same instrument. The smaller the pixels, well, we can, let's say, have more pixels per area. And that allows us, well, to see more small details in certain objects. In this case, the one that wins is the 183. 183 has the size of the microns. Pixels is 2.4 microns. It is the smallest of all that I whistle. It is an advantage because imagine that you have an area of the nebula, and in a camera this covers, we are going to put 100 pixels, and in the other it covers 500 pixels in the same area. Which one can he give you? Well, more details, the one with 500 pixels per area. No, and that has to do with the size of the pixels. So I repeat, in this case, who wins is the 183. It has the smallest pixels. 585 has also small pixels, but a little bigger, 2.9, and the largest of all. It is the 533AH that has the largest pixels, 3.76. That is, in this case, the 183 would be at an advantage, and the 533H would be at a disadvantage. It would be the worst of all dimensions now, because as I said, more or less, the area, although I didn't do the calculation, but seeing the numbers like this, the area between these two, the difference is not going to be much, however. This one is obviously smaller, not the 585, so the 585 is at a disadvantage in this sense. Oh, sorry, I also skipped the resolution. The resolution, the one with the most resolution, is resolution 183. It is evident if it has an area similar to 533H, but nevertheless the pixels are much smaller. Well, it will have more pixels per area, not both in the same area, but smaller pixels. So it will have more pixels per area. So the resolution in megapixels, 20.2 megapixels to 183 is the winner. And then the ACI 533, 9.05, and the ACI 585. 829 would be the loser, as the difference really is not considerable between these two 5339 megapixel 585, 8.29. I mean, but hey, the 585s have less resolution anyway. This is, of course, because the pixels are smaller than 533H, but nevertheless, the area is much smaller. So when we do the calculation, it has fewer megapixels, the 585. Well, in this aspect of resolution, the 183 continues to win, or wins again, as I had already said in dimensions, because the 585 loses here. That's why I put it in red. And these two, well, they have a quite similar area. I haven't done the calculation, but I don't think the difference is much. Now, the memory they use, this has to do with processing speed, etc., of the image with dress of digital, analog, etc. This 585 has twice the memory, 512 megabytes. The other two are 256 megabytes. This is something that many do not consider important, but it is important for them. Perhaps it is not the best known or, let's say, the most primordial things, but greater memory is important because in this case, the 585 now gains a very important factor, big quantum efficiency. This is how efficient it is on average now, because these cameras are color. They have blue, green, and red for different colors. So for each one, it has a different efficiency. This has been like an average, that is, of the number of photons it receives, how many are actually used, which ones are detected, which ones are not reflected, dates, and so on. Well, the winner here is 585. With the 585, it is an excellent sensor, and it is the cheapest of all, which makes it advantageous. 91% of effectiveness is followed by 183.184%, and the loser in this case would be 53301H, only 80%. All these values are not low, they are quite good. I mean, they are good cameras, but hey, it's another factor to take into account. Best of all, more than 10% above the 533H is the R6 585. What's the advantage of this? Well, fewer photons wasted, and this, of course, is a time saver. Now, native beat dips the depth of the well, not of the pixels of these sensors. Well, 14 has 533 each, and the other 283 and 585. Well, 2 and 12 in this case would be the winner would be 533H. But now with this, there is another factor associated, which is the full well capacity that we are going to talk about later. Really, perhaps more important than the big deep. We're going to see it later, but hey, we're going to continue in maximum order, number of frames per second. How many frames per second to the maximum up to camera resolution. This is especially important for the planetarium. Not what we want to do, although these cameras are specialized in deep sky, because of course we can use them for planetarium. Even if they are not ideal, they are the same. Excellent planetarium cameras, although they are not, let's say, the ideal ones for it. So the more prime per second, the more images per second, the better for this one. Remember that in planetarium, what we do is a video, an AVI format, and with software, since the software takes the best images within that, stacks them, etc., etc. So more frames per second is an advantage, right? In this case, the winner is again the H585, which gives about 47 frames per second at maximum resolution. Sure. What about, say, 183? Well, the maximum resolution is more than double that. So, of course, the higher the resolution, the harder it is for it to have more frames per second, right? So in this case, this sensor is very good. But it is also good for planets. For planetary, we do not need a large sensor, especially for planets which are very small, even with large focal lengths. And so it is important that it has a large number of frames per second. So in this case, the winner is also the 585. Now this is good. It's very important. Full well capacity. What is the capacity of each well? Remember, pixels are like a square, right? In fact, they really are square that catch light. Each pixel captures different intensities of light, regardless of the photons that impact it, and then it is processed into an analog image, etc. And we have the final image. But what do those pixels do as depicted? No, it's not really like that. It's represented as a well. A container where electrons fall, the more electrons you can fit, the better. In what sense? Well, let's say that we have something, let's say the nebulosorium has a very bright center, also with these trapezoid stars, etc. It has stars and it has very, very faint moles. That happens to me, for example, with the Andromeda galaxy. It has a very bright center and a very weak boat and many other objects. So the more capacity this well has, let's say the literal translation of each pixel, since we can have greater ease of when we stretch the image, remember that in the end, almost all of this has a very narrow band. When we stretch that, let's say, to put it in some way, in Spanish, well, the difference between the brightest areas and the weakest areas of a nebula, or the weakest areas of a nebula and a bright star in the field, well, they can, let's say, rescue both. It's not going to supersaturate the brightest zone. Supersaturation is when the east well is filled with electrons, and we continue exposing then. There is no more detail because it is overexposed. And on the other hand, the fainter parts of the object with less brightness is, of course, the background of the sky, because the background of the sky we want to be zero, not the signal it emits, because the rest would be noise, but let's say the nebula and so on. The most areas of the nebula, if they are in the amount of electrons it catches, is below the noise of the same sensor. Well, we are not going to differentiate the nebula from that noise. That is, the more capacity this well has, we can photograph objects where there is a very bright area and another very dark area, and we can still, when processing, well, save details in both. So this is very important. I repeat, what is it? The winner in this case, since 533H, is of course related to the native BDIPs. It's one of the factors. It's not all the factors, but it's related to this. There are also 50,000 electrons. Okay, the capacity of 50,000 electrons. The 585 is a little lower. No, the difference is not much. An excellent sensor has been seen. 47,000 electrons, and the loser in this case, no matter how much we say, is 183.15. 1,000 electrons is the loser in this case. And finally, well, in this table, not the reading of the reading noise, let's say. This is the process when it is transformed. When the electrons are read out, they are transformed into analogs and so on. When we take that information out of the sensor to put it in a fairly colloquial way, not the process of extracting that one of those electrons from the photons. Sorry, I've been talking about those photons, converting them into electrons, etc. Converting the the light signal into electricity. Well, that generates noise, but the lower that noise, the better. Because that is noise that is added to the noise effect of the sensor. In this case, the winner is the 585. Let's say the process of transforming photons into electrons and teach logic, etc. That is in EN, in rescuing that information that comes in from the light or converting it into EN. This whole digital process, so that you understand somehow it is not the most efficient, it is the 585. The difference between the other two is not no, it is a lot. As you see here, from 1 to 3.8, the 533, from 1.6 to 3, 183. I mean, the difference isn't much, but in this case, yes, the winner is 585. I repeat, it's an excellent sensor. So, as you can see here in general, before moving to the last thing that I am going to analyze in general, because everything depends, I repeat, on what interests everyone. But except for the size of the sensor, I would stay with the 585. Quantum efficiency is the greatest. Football capacity 47 is almost the same as 533H. Something very important. Readout noise is inferior. The very important price is much lower than the other 2 megapixels. It is less than the 183, but almost the same as the 533H, so the difference is not much. Double RAM memory. So I would stick with the cheaper 585, and it is an excellent sensor. But hey, those who don't like it, those who want to have a larger field of view, then buy a larger sensor. So let's look at the visual fields. We'll make a comparison here, in this case with a well-known object, the Orion Nebula. I have to clarify that here the scale of the nebula is not there. The three are not on the same scale. It is an error that really should have put it on the same scale. But the important thing is to compare the size of the sensor with the area of the nebula. I tell you this because here, for example, 183 seems much smaller than 533H, because if you compare the size of the nebula, it looks smaller than this, not this scale. It's even smaller than this one, so the 183 seems almost the same size as the 585. But the important thing is to see the size of the sensor with the nebula. Let's look here. I repeat, 583 is square. It would look like this, and it would be marked like this, Orion Nebula. As you can see, it fits perfectly the two nebula, M42 and M43, on the same campus as right on the edge, now 183. As you can see, it looks narrower. Here it looks fairer in this sense, but here it is wider than this. If you compare the distance here, the area that is from here to here and from here and from this is what I repeat. The image is smaller than this. If we rub the sensor, for example, that there would be much better, the two nebula, if we put it in this position, that there would be perfectly. It is worth saying that this is calculated for an EgoStart 42. Of course, each focal length is different since it would have a different field of view. I used the EgoStart because I already had it. The EgoStart has 420 millimeter focus distance or 42 centimeter. I already had it put on the Stellarium because on one of my telescopes, and decided to use this one because it is at a focal length, let's say, pretty average. Many of these telescopes that we use, because it is very common that they have 3050, 360, 400 mm with a focal length of 500. That is, they are in a more or less quite common range of these achromatic telescopes, let's say not very large. And so that is why I decided to use. So this would be for 42 centimeter focal length, of course, each focal length. It would make us a different field. So, as you can see here, the local 585.1 with a 42 centimeter high diameter is the one I have, the Orion Nebula, even putting it like this so that both can fit. The nebula canisters would fall out of sight. I repeat, these two have about the same area. This one is smaller. But the big plus of this one is that it has a great sensor. They are all good, but this one with an enviable price and has all these features.
Well, that's it. I hope it has been useful not only to Fernando, but to the rest of the subscribers who pass by here on the channel. This comparison is 3 cameras. Which is the best? Well, I consider that if it is the first camera color that they are going to buy, I would buy the 585. Why? Because it's a lot cheaper, $200 cheaper. It's a great sensor, great. The big disadvantage is above all that it is the smallest of all, right? So many times we want a bigger sensor, more field of view, etc.
But hey, that
Is that it? It is relative. It depends on the interest of each person. For me, it is perhaps the best option, although 3.
they are excellent.
Cameras at a very good price if we compare with the prices we have on the market. I specifically have experience with the 183. It is excellent. So I leave the decision to you, but me. Would you recommend for a first?
Camera, because sometimes,
We then want to switch to chromatic mode and sell this one.
and so on. Well, it is.
A lower expense always when we're starting out, right?
And
And testing, sometimes we buy a camera of this type, we don't like it, and we go back to traditional cameras thing.
Uncommon, no, but it can happen then if we want to sell it.
Getting rid of her might make us lose less money. There are several reasons for it being a good start.
for what?
It's easier to try and then increase, let's say, the quality, but in general, the 3 are excellent cameras.
Last.
The 585 model, despite being larger and cheaper, has no disadvantages compared to others except for the sensor size. So I leave the final decision to you. Here are my criteria. As always, thank you so much for joining, and see you in the next Astromania video.